You're about to witness 23 moves of pure perfection from Vishy Anand. So for me, this is the greatest game he ever played, and it inspired me to take up the semi-Slav defence, which I've now played for many years. So he played this against Levon Aronian, who was over 2800 at the time, and it was played in Tata Steel 2013. So let's see what happened here. Vishy had black, and we had these standard opening moves of the Queen's Pawn game. So Vishy starts with c6, which goes into the Slav defence. We had these knight moves here, and after knight c3, if he goes bishop f5, this is the Slav, but he goes pawn e6, setting up this pawn triangle. This is the semi-Slav defence. It looks like you've killed this bishop, but we'll see how black gets that one into the game. So pawn e3 was played, knight came to d7, bishop d3, and this is where black takes on c4 now. After the bishop recaptures, pawn b5 kicks that one, and this is the main line starting position of the semi-Slav. Now the most common moves here are bishop to b7, pawn to a6, but Vishy goes with this sideline of bishop to d6. We had castles now from both players. The queen came to c2 from Levon Aronian, and the bishop now developed to b7. And what we note here is that black isn't wasting a tempo by playing a6. Black wants to go pawn c5 in one go and not actually protect this b5 pawn. So pawn a3 was now played by Levon, securing this knight. I just want to mention that if white goes pawn e4 here, then the standard way to meet this is with pawn to e5. That's how you're not losing a piece in these kind of structures. But we didn't have this. a3 is the main line. And now you often see pawn a5 here, preventing white from playing b4. Anand goes rook c8 straight away. Now white can play b4 here, preventing the c5 push, or does it? There's actually some crazy lines here by pushing c5, and I won't go through them all, but black's actually worked out a lot of them to a draw, because although you give up a piece here, there's tons of pressure down the c-file against this knight and queen. So okay, we didn't have pawn to b4 from Levon. Instead he played this move knight g5, going after this h7 pawn immediately with three pieces, as we note. But this was actually a mistake, and Anand knew when he was sitting at the board that this wasn't the best move. So he sat for some time, thought about how to pounce. Now before I show you what he played, it's worth helping you understand the position here. So these bishops are raking down towards the king, as we can see. Whoops, misfire. And that's one of the big issues for the white position here. We also note that the knight can come to g4, which then opens up the queen. Now if you take on h2 immediately, whilst you can play like this, we could have a line like this, you win back the piece and you've won a pawn, it's actually not so great after pawn f3. The knight has to retreat, white sets up the centre here, the queen is hit, and for the sake of a pawn, white has good development and central control. So that's not what black wants to do, but the themes are similar. So pawn c5 is what Vishy played, just immediately opening the line of this rook, of the bishop, without wasting a tempo on a6. So what's going on here? Well, in the game Levon took here, but if he took this pawn on b5, then you're running into this sacrifice on h2, and it is working well now, because after this line here, we pick up the piece, and this time the rook is already on this c line. So if you try f3 again, well, now we take this pawn, opening up the rook immediately. Very different game, but black is doing well in this variation. So that's why the pawn wasn't taken there. If you go with the bishop and capture this pawn on b5, there are similar problems with takes here, opening the rook. So Levon didn't go for this. He captured on h7. He continued with his plan. And now you don't want to take like this. In these variations, because there's no knight on g5, you're not even winning back a piece with the queen in these kind of lines here. This isn't good for black. But knight g4 is. This is the follow-up. So you open up the queen to spring out like this in the future. You bring the knight into the danger zone. Now there's a threat against this pawn. In the game, Aronian went f4. But if you went pawn to g3, well, what's the problem with this? The knight can take on h2 here. This is the problem. After the king recaptures, then you can jump in with check. using the fact that this pawn is actually pinned. And if we come back just a few moves here, if you try pawn to h3, which was potentially the best move, then we have this check with the bishop. After the king moves, the queen can come into the danger zone, and the game is still very balanced here. Now, you can't actually take this knight, or we're leading to checkmate after the bishop moves away. There's also a threat for the queen to take this pawn, again using the pin of this bishop here. So white would have to block this diagonal with bishop e4 or pawn d5. Game goes on. Interesting, balanced, black is attacking. But we didn't have pawn h3, we had pawn f4 instead. But this is a very weakening move, and Vishy pounces. So he takes on d4, and after the pawn recaptures, here Vishy plays a stunning move, highlighting all of the frailties of the white position here. And if you're enjoying this video, do hit that subscribe button, join our growing chess community, and never miss a daily upload. So what did Vishy play here? He played bishop to c5. Stunning idea. Now you're giving a whole piece, so what happens if that's captured? Well, then we jump in with the knight. And the big problem here is that the queen is coming to this d4 checking square and wreaking havoc along that diagonal. We're also attacking this bishop twice. So if you retreated it to e2, then we can check from here. After the king moves away, we jump in like this. Now you can't come back with the king, or we have this classic smothered checkmate. The queen jumps in here. After the rook recaptures, we mate like this, a very classic pattern. So after the knight jumps in with check in this position, the rook would have to take, the queen recaptures, and the problem here is that you're threatening mate on e1 and also on g2, and white can't stop both of those threats simultaneously, would have to resign the position. So that's why Levon didn't capture the bishop on c5. If we come back here, instead he immediately drops this bishop back to e2, attacking this knight here. And now we have a second thunderbolt of a move from Anand. If you want to pause and look for it, please do so. He plays the second knight into the middle of the board, again allowing it to be taken. What is going on here? Well, it's very similar patterns. Say you were to take this knight, then once again we jump in and check. The king moves away, and this time we can actually deliver mate like this. These are the recurring patterns you see. The same problem still exists with the bishop. You can't take this bishop here. You can't take this one with the d pawn. Here Aronian's in a world of trouble. So he jumps in here, and now Vishy throws in a capture here. He could have taken with the queen, but instead he takes with the bishop. He wants to now bring his queen out this way. These are the other themes of the position. So after the king moved away, now the bishop was recaptured, and here Aronian took this rook on f8. He's also setting up ideas of bringing in the queen here with check to try and get some defense going along the h-file. And that's why this stunning move was now played from Vishy, pawn to f5. If he went with queen h4 immediately, then the queen comes in with check. You can get them off the board. White's doing okay. So after this move was played, the knight came back to g6, covering this h4 square from the queen, but now it's just a death by slow motion attack. Queen f6 hits the knight, asks a question of it. Pawn h3 was played counter-attacking, but Vishy simply took here. You can't even take this one, or queen h6 is actually mate, using the power of these bishops. I mean, look at these pieces, just absolutely deadly. Beautiful position. So the knight wasn't captured here. We had queen e2 from Aronian, looking at this piece once again. Now the queen came into the danger zone on h5. There's a threat to take here once again, checkmating the white king. So the queen came to d3, laterally defending that pawn, but this allowed bishop e3, a beautiful interference tactic to finish the game. If you take with the bishop, then we're simply checkmating like this and taking here. If you take with the queen, well, similar problems. I mean, that's a whole queen for a bishop. Clearly terrible, but you can't even recapture that one. Once again, then you're getting mated like this. What a game. If you enjoyed this one and want to see a Firouzja Immortal, click here. Thanks for watching. See you soon.